Hello, and welcome to the Federal Housing Finance Agency's 2023 Duty to Serve Markets Public Listening Sessions. I am Toy Roberts, a member of the Duty to Serve Markets team, and I will be emceeing today's listening sessions. And today, the listening sessions will be recorded. Thank you all for joining us here today. We are excited to be hosting another series of public listening sessions this year that focuses on all three duty to serve underserved markets. This year's listening sessions, we are particularly interested in getting your feedback on the enterprise's next duty to serve plan cycle activities for 2025-2027. We will be hosting 3 listening sessions, one for each duty to serve underserved market. And for today's session, we will be focusing on the affordable housing preservation market. But before we get started, I'd like to first introduce you to the lead of our Duty to Serve Markets team, Supervisory Policy Analyst, Ms. Marcia Behringer.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much, Toy. As Toy said, I'm Marcia Behringer, and I'm a Supervisory Policy Analyst and the team lead for the Duty to Serve program at FHFA. It's my true pleasure to welcome all of you today to this listening session. And it's also my pleasure to introduce Ted Wortell, who will be providing our opening remarks. Ted is Associate Director of the Office of Housing and Community Investment in the Division of Housing, Mission, and Goals at FHFA. Since the creation of the Office of Housing and Community Investment, he has coordinated the oversight of the enterprise's affordable housing goals, duty to serves, and the Federal Home Loan Bank affordable programs. Prior to coming to FHFA, Ted served as the Director of Regulatory Affairs at the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. He's also served as Chief of Staff for Community Lending at Fannie Mae, and prior to that, served in the Office of Policy at the U.S. Small Business Administration and as a budget analyst for affordable housing programs at the U.S. Office of Management and Budget. Ted?
Thanks so much, Marcia, and thanks, Toy. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. And a special thank you to all of you for participating this afternoon. It has been a really busy week of listening sessions. I know some of you participated in our earlier sessions. On Monday, we talked about rural housing, yesterday on manufactured housing, and today is our final listening session, and we're focusing on the affordable housing preservation market. Just gonna start by touching on a few of the ways that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac already support this market. First, through rental housing with expiring affordability requirements. Another is shared equity, home ownership, and another is energy and water efficient homes for rent and for sale. And as you all know, there is a great deal of need in all three of these areas, starting with expiring use provisions. About 5 million units or 10% of the U.S. housing stock or rental stock is supported by federal project-based programs. And by some estimates, by 2026, close to 330,000 affordable units will have expired affordability restrictions. Shared equity is one way that allows low-income families to be able to afford home ownership. When last surveyed, approximately 250,000 families actually own shared equity homes in the U.S. We know that number is growing, in part as a result of support of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And in the energy and water efficiency sector, we know the lowest 20% of low-income earners spend close to 9% of their income on energy expenses, compared to about 6.5% for families at the average income level. And according to a study from the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, low-income, minority, and older households often have higher energy costs than others living in the same areas. As far as where we are right now, FHFA is already coordinating with the enterprises as they're starting to develop their next duty to serve plans, which will cover 2025 through 2027. And that's why listening sessions this week are especially important. Fannie, Freddie, and certainly FHFA need to hear from stakeholders like all of you about the current activities the enterprises should continue, potential changes they should make in their approaches, and then what new activities they should potentially add to their next plans. In a few minutes, Fannie and Freddie will tell you more about the things they're doing to address the needs in the affordable housing preservation market and some of what they plan to do in the future. So on behalf of our entire team, I want to thank you all again for joining us. I encourage you to submit written comments by July 31st. Please also consider visiting the Duty to Serve page on FHFA.gov or our YouTube channel in the coming days, where you can view videos and transcripts of the listening sessions that we've held this week. Thanks again. Let me turn it back to Toy.
Thank you, Ted. All right, and so now, before we move forward with the remainder of the agenda, I do have a few important housekeeping remarks. As you know, we have organized this webinar in order to obtain your input on Enterprise's next duty to serve plan activities that fall under each of the 3 duty to serve underserved markets. During today's session, FHFA will not discuss the status or timing of any potential rulemaking. If FHFA does decide to engage in a rulemaking on any matters discussed at this meeting today, this meeting would not take the place of a public comment process. The rulemaking document would establish the public comment process, and you would need to submit your comments, if any, in accordance with the submission instructions in that document. FHFA may summarize the feedback gathered at today's session in a future rulemaking document if we determine that a summary would be useful to explain the basis of a rulemaking. Also, please keep in mind that nothing said in today's session should be construed as binding on or a final decision by the FHFA director or FHFA staff. Any questions we may have are focused on understanding your views and do not indicate a position of FHFA staff or the agency. Okay, now with that said, we have a great lineup of speakers today. We will be hearing from 17 guest speakers, and midway through, we will have a short 10-minute break. Each speaker will have up to 5 minutes to speak, and we will try our best to stay on schedule and ask that everyone's a 1-minute warning as their time draws to a close. If someone does go over their time, unfortunately, I will have to interrupt in order to help keep us on schedule. However, if that does happen, speakers are welcome to submit written testimony, and their full testimony will be included in the public comments record. Each speaker will have the ability to mute and unmute their microphones throughout the session, but we ask that you keep your microphones muted until it is time for you to speak. We also ask that all speakers be prepared to turn on your video cameras during your speaking segment. Finally, as was mentioned earlier, today's session is being recorded. FHFA will also prepare a transcript of today's session, which will include the names of all speakers and the organizations they represent. We will post the recording and transcript on FHFA's website and YouTube channel, along with any materials being presented today. And I'm sorry, I believe my camera was not on, so. We're all set now, and then we are now ready to, before we hear from our guest speakers, each enterprise will speak briefly about today's listening session on the affordable housing preservation market. And the first up, we will hear from Fannie Mae. Speaking from Fannie Mae Duty to Serve team is Ms. Seema Radhakrishnan.
Thank you, Toy. And good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'd first like to extend a thank you to Director Thompson and the FHFA Duty to Serve team for hosting this session. And thank you as well to all the participants for your contributions today. So engagements such as today's listening session provide an invaluable opportunity to hear directly from industry advocates and stakeholders who are closest to the challenges of this market. For the 2025 to 2027 Duty to Serve plan cycle, we've really tried to take a collective approach to writing this plan, and we really look forward to collaborating with all of you and incorporating your ideas in the next installment of the plan. And as we all know, AHP is a very large market and is very diverse in all that it covers. We have learned a lot with respect to how expansive and important this underserved market is in the overall housing landscape. So in terms of our loan purchase trends in our multifamily business, there have been several drivers. The volume growth in Section 8, LIHTC, and our residential economic diversity categories stem from consistent engagement with active lenders and sponsors in our core business segments. And in the rising interest rate environment, some deals are pulled forward in favor of locking in a rate at a faster pace. There's also a noticeable increase in the number of public facility corporations deals, particularly in the state of Texas, which contributed to growth in our state and local and our RED loan purchase volume. We also learned a lot while engaging in our robust outreach efforts. Through our work in Section 515, it was evident that technical assistance provided through partnerships on the 515 transfer application process were particularly important for small entities and nonprofits. And on the energy side, in our multifamily business, we studied decarbonization and learned quite a bit about its impact on affordability. But during this study, we also learned that further research is needed to understand how we can adapt product offerings in favor of decarbonization. And on the single family side, we continue work with our industry partners to develop a database of cost-effective home improvement recommendations and local, state, and utility incentives for low and moderate income households. The database will support a web-based consumer tool that will launch in 2023. And finally, as part of what we've learned through our participation in this market, we also identified several challenges that we faced and that we will continue to face. In the rural preservation space, we recognize that process challenges persist in the Section 515 business and the presence of available alternatives such as a USDA 538 product. We're analyzing ways to improve our competitive offerings and continue our outreach efforts to borrowers, engagement with DUS lenders, and our engagement with USDA to better understand barriers and potential solutions. In our RAD business, it remains really challenging to accurately forecast the number of RAD transactions per year due to the long lead times, inability to forecast public housing financing needs, and variations in funding for public housing authorities. So we continue to navigate the various federal and local policies that play key roles in how quickly these deals are executed. In shared equity, the policy changes to accommodate the model deed restriction have been implemented and efforts are underway to complete lender engagement on the model deed restriction. So we continue to push forward on that. And lastly, in our distressed REO business, historically low REO volumes, as well as rising construction costs, have constrained sales to buyers on the Community First platform. In response, we continue to be active in our outreach to nonprofits and public entities to improve the geographic coverage of Community First, where we've expanded buyer coverage into 6 new states in 2022. And with that, I will conclude my remarks. And I just wanted to thank all of you again for the opportunity to participate. And thank you to all of the participants for their valuable feedback. And I'll hand it back to you, Toy.
Thank you, Seema. All right, and so now we will hear remarks from Freddie Mac, and speaking from Freddie Mac Duty to Serve team is Mr. I'm sorry. It's Mr. Mike Morosi Brown.
Very good. Well, thank you, Toy, and good afternoon. Thank you to all of today's participants. We are fortunate to be joined today by thought leaders, market participants, and others with deep expertise in preserving housing affordability. We deeply appreciate your feedback, ideas, collaboration, and other efforts aimed at making a positive difference for people and communities across the country. We also appreciate the team at FHFA, which continues to offer not just oversight, but thought partnership and strategic insights that help guide our work. Thank you again for hosting today's forum. Over the course of Duty to Serve, we've increased our presence in certain areas as we've expanded into others, and we've had important successes largely because of your willingness to share insights and experience with us and to work in the spirit of partnership. Through this work, we've also deepened our knowledge of what it takes to better serve underserved markets. We've always known the importance of collaborating across the ecosystem to help move housing forward, but our work in Duty to Serve really puts an exclamation point on it. Progress requires strong relationships, deep expertise, and patience. And related to that, no single solution can transform the market. Instead, it comes about through incremental change plus outreach and education that helps maximize the benefits. This is certainly true in the affordable housing preservation market. We work diligently to achieve our multifamily affordable housing preservation objectives throughout 2022, supporting more than 72,000 Duty to Serve eligible multifamily units in the AHP space with more than $12 billion in liquidity. This included record years for our LIHTC debt and Section 8 loan purchases. On the single family side, helping to lower the costs through increased energy efficiency is a growing focus. For example, our Green Choice Mortgage finances home energy efficiency improvements, and proceeds from refinances can be used to pay off existing higher cost debt on previous energy efficiency improvements. Our single family green bond program increases market liquidity and raises the visibility of energy efficiency mortgage financing. And to accelerate market growth, we're working across the ecosystem to increase data standardization, which is critical to capturing information that will deepen insights into the value of energy efficiency features and in turn encourage more lending and access to credit in this space. We learned that standardization and collaboration are also essential to growing shared equity home ownership and the long-term affordability that it enables. We champion standardization and best practices to help shared equity program stewards strengthen their operations, as well as make it easier for lenders to participate in this nascent market. Lenders have also expressed the need for access to more information about shared equity programs in their lending footprints and the program's housing inventory to increase their confidence and willingness to participate. Here too, we have been working collaboratively to gather relevant information and make it easily available to lenders. Our mortgage offerings for financing homes with income-based resale restrictions, including in community land trusts, help make home ownership possible and affordable for more households that otherwise would likely be priced out of the market, especially in high-cost areas. Recently, though, unfavorable market conditions have caused headwinds that have slowed loan originations and therefore our loan purchases across the board. We're working through this environment with our partners throughout the market and fulfilling our mission to support market stability and affordability in all economic conditions. Overall, we've made good progress in the affordable housing preservation market together, but there is so much more to do. We appreciate the opportunity to learn from you today and look forward to your constructive feedback, which we will consider as we develop our next Duty to Serve plan. Your input and support are essential to ensuring that we build on our shared progress during the next plan cycle. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike. And so now, without further ado, we will now begin hearing from our stakeholder guest speakers. And the first speaker we have on our agenda is Ms. Megan Haberly from the National Community Reinvestment Coalition. However, we don't yet have her on the line. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the next speaker, which is Mr. Mike Kutlowitz from the Local Initiative Support Corporation.
Thanks very much, Toy, and thank you for FHFA for the opportunity to comment today. My name is Mark Kutlowitz. I'm the Senior Director of Policy at the Local Initiative Support Corporation, or LISC. Please be able to provide comments on the GSE's Duty to Serve 2025 to 2027 underserved market plans. LISC was established in 1979. We're a national nonprofit housing and community development organization and a certified community development financial institution or CDFI, dedicated to helping community residents transform distressed neighborhoods into healthy and sustainable communities of choice and opportunity. We mobilize corporate, government, and philanthropic support to support local community development organizations with loans, grants, and equity investments, as well as technical and management assistance. Our organization has a nationwide footprint with local offices in 38 cities and a rural list network where we partner with almost 150 community-based organizations serving small towns. LISC invested over $2.8 billion in these communities last year, and our work covers a wide range of activities, including affordable housing, economic development, building family wealth and incomes, education, and trying to create healthy communities. LISC is also a member of the Underserved Mortgage Markets Coalition. The UMMC is a collection of 29 affordable housing groups working to expand mortgage financing to groups traditionally underserved by the market. LISC believes that the duty to serve effort should focus primarily on supporting and expanding transactions that improve affordable housing opportunities in underserved geographies and for underserved people. The effort of the enterprises pursuant to their duty to serve obligations should be evaluated by the extent to which they facilitate more transactions to create or preserve these types of housing opportunities, particularly for households at the lowest end of the income spectrum, although consistent with the mandate to engage in for-profit profit-making activities for the GSEs. This is why LISC has been supportive of UMMC recommendations to measure the GSE's preservation activities as an overall increase of their aggregate production volume levels. My comments today are going to focus on affordable housing preservation, which is a critical component of LISC's broader strategy for community revitalization and economic mobility. LISC supports affordable housing preservation through technical assistance in our national footprint and through our financing activities as a CDFI and those of the National Equity Fund, our nonprofit low-income housing tax credit syndicated affiliate. So what can be done in the next cycle? First, there's no greater, more important program than the low-income housing tax credit program. In 2017, FHFA allowed the GSEs to re-enter the LIHTC market as equity investors, setting a $500 million cap, with $200 million required for mission-related activities. This was important since the mission-related activities focus helped provide equity for very underserved markets. It also broadened the investor market after corporate tax rates were lowered from 35 to 21%, resulting in lower LIHTC equity pricing. FHFA subsequently raised the investment cap by $350 million for the GSEs for a total of $1.7 billion. Any investments above $300 million in a given year are required to be in areas that have been identified by FHFA as markets having difficulty attracting investors. These investments are designed to preserve affordable housing, support mixed income housing, supportive housing, rural housing projects, or meet other affordable housing objectives. LISC supports increases in the GSE's equity investment caps and recommend that they be adjusted by an inflationary factor going forward, and that a portion of this extra investment authority continue to be dedicated to underserved LIHTC markets. These investments should also be eligible for duty to serve credit. This will allow the GSEs to increase their investment activity for projects difficult to finance and is especially important as the LIHTC market is subject to regulatory uncertainty as the federal banking regulators work together to finalize the CRA rule potentially this year. The proposed rule that was out for comment would remove the investment test as a separate test, which if ultimately adopted in the final rule could have negative impacts on LIHTC pricing. FHFA should continue to increase the GSE LIHTC cap beyond annual inflationary adjustments if the program receives additional resources from Congress or experiences negative pricing impacts from a new finalized CRA rule. Also wanted to touch on qualified contracts. LISC and our partners recently sent FHFA a letter with recommendations on how the GSEs can help preserve LIHTC properties by not providing debt financing for properties that could or did take advantage of a loophole to prematurely end affordability restrictions in the low-income housing tax credit program. This loophole, known as the qualified contract provision, is resulting in the loss of approximately 10,000 affordable housing apartments annually. Other presenters are going to discuss this issue in further detail, although we support recommendations that FHFA, 1, prohibit the GSEs from investing in housing credit properties unless the owner has agreed to waive its qualified contract rights. 2, prohibit the GSEs from acquiring multifamily loans on housing credit properties unless the owner has agreed to waive their QC rights. And 3, prohibit the GSEs from acquiring multifamily loans on properties financed with housing credits where the owner has taken the property through the QC process and terminated the rent and income limitations on the property. And lastly, support, although outside the lane here of this conversation, that federal home loan banks from providing affordable housing program funds to housing credit properties unless the owner has agreed to waive their QC rights. I also wanted to touch on CDFI equity investments. LISC was particularly pleased that Fannie's current duty to serve plan states that it will, quote, explore the feasibility of investing in one or more CDFIs to provide improved access to affordable mortgage lending to consumers in high needs rural regions. This is a welcome advancement in the plan cycle, since a plain reading of the authorizing statute for duty to serve indicates that the GSEs do have the authority to invest in CDFIs performing duty to serve activities. LISC recommends that FHFA authorize the GSEs to make equity or equity-like investments in CDFIs through other duty to serve activities, especially where there have been challenges making process through their conventional lender network. This will allow them to expand their investment activities in CDFIs in the next 3-year duty to serve plan cycle and make improvement in those places where historically there have been challenges. Another critically important change is for FHFA to publish duty to serve data at an objective level. Objective level data would create the feedback loop that's needed for the strategic planning process to improve the enterprise's business processes and to understand the results of their work in the duty to serve space. We encourage FHFA to publish the evaluated data that you have also withheld to date. I thank you for the opportunity to provide feedback today on the GSE's affordable housing preservation activities. We encourage FHFA and the enterprises to continue the commitment to the sector by increasing their role in preserving affordable housing and creating new markets where there are gaps. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Cutlitz. I'm sorry. Our next speaker is Ms. Ariane Parks from the Enterprise Community Partners.
Thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's session. As noted, my name is Ariane Parks, and I'm the Senior Director of Policy at Enterprise Community Partners. Enterprise is a national nonprofit that supports community development organizations on the ground, aggregates and invests capital for impact, and advances housing policy at every level of government. Since 1982, Enterprise has invested $64 billion and created over 951,000 homes across all 50 states, DC, Puerto Rico, and the US Virgin Islands. The low-income housing tax credit, which is the nation's largest and most successful tool for encouraging private investment in the production and preservation of affordable rental housing, is essential to this work. We appreciate Fannie and Freddie's partnership in this crucial affordable housing program and are proud to count both as housing credit investors. We also appreciate the opportunity to once again have this valuable dialogue with FHFA on affordable housing and equitable housing finance, and specifically acknowledge the alignment between Enterprise's mission and the vision laid forth by Director Thompson for FHFA and the GSEs. Like LISC, we are proud to be a member of the Underserved Mortgage Markets Coalition, working to expand mortgage financing to groups traditionally underserved in the market. Since re-entering the market, Fannie and Freddie have both deployed capital to support high-impact affordable housing development across the country, including for developments that preserve affordable housing. And we also recommend that FHFA expressly include duty to serve credit for equity investment in preservation. As investors with an explicit public purpose, the GSEs should put the highest priority on the preservation of housing affordability for the longest possible time period, and addressing qualified contracts and right of first refusal should be explicitly incorporated into the GSE's duty to serve plans. With the significant losses due to the QCs noted by Mark each year, Enterprise strongly advocates for closing the QC loophole through federal legislation, as well as through state level policies requiring a QC waiver as a condition of receiving a housing credit allocation. Enterprise is also concerned about the practices of some owners of housing credit limited partner interests, which have resulted in disputes and litigation over the terms of the limited partner's exit, particularly where the nonprofit holds a right of first refusal under Section 42I-7 of the Housing Credit Program. This litigation is contrary to congressional intent with the ROFR provision and threatens the long-term preservation of these properties. We recommend the FHFA and the GSEs take the following steps to advance preservation priorities, including requiring housing credit funds in which they invest, including single investor funds, explicitly state in the fund partnership agreement that one of the business purposes of the fund is to identify and implement strategies to maintain properties as low-income housing subsequent to disposition. Such a statement of purpose is paramount to the disposition planning, typically occurring at the expiration of the initial compliance period. This statement directs the syndicator sponsor of the fund to pursue preservation strategies, including sustainability of the affordable units through the extended use period at a minimum. And it also enables the syndicator to push back on substitute investors who may try to direct the fund to pursue profit at the expense of preservation. Historically, this statement of purpose is in enterprises fund agreements, including with Fannie and Freddie. Similarly, GSEs should require that the project level partnership agreements for the housing credit properties in which they invest include in their statements of business purpose to identify and implement strategies to maintain the property as low-income housing subsequent to the sale of the property, and to, during the extended use period, maintaining and operating the credit units in compliance with the extended use agreement. FHFA and the GSE should also prohibit language found in some project level partnership agreements, which compels the general partner to submit a qualified contract request if requested by the limited partner. Such provisions are entirely unnecessary and militate against the preservation purposes the GSE should be advancing. These provisions would communicate strongly to all parties, including subsequent owners and investors, the express intent to keep the properties maintained and affordable long-term. Enterprise supports the effort in Freddie Mac's duty to serve plan to include language in project level partnership agreement provisions intended to protect nonprofit project sponsors from future transfer to parties who may move against their ROFR rights. We have worked with Freddie Mac to finalize this language in our nonprofit sponsored transactions. Some allocators, such as New York City, have adopted additional policies to achieve the purpose of the ROFR statute. FHFA and the GSE should consider requiring that these provisions be included in the partnership agreements for projects in which they invest. Public feedback on duty to serve plans is a valuable component of the process. We echo List's comments to request that FHFA publish DTS and EHF evaluation data on an objective level. We encourage FHFA to publish the data withheld to date as well. On behalf of Enterprise, thank you again for the opportunity to weigh in on these important preservation issues today, which we would like to see incorporated in the next round of duty to serve plans.
Thank you, Ms. Parks. Okay, and so our next speaker, we'll hear from Mr. Robert Rosen from Rosen and Associates.
Thank you for convening this session to receive recommendations on the enterprise's next duty to serve underserved markets plans and what actions can be taken with regard to the future activities in the affordable housing preservation market. My name is Robert Rosen. I'm a housing credit policy attorney and have been working on the low-income housing tax credit program since before its enactment in 1986. I believe Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are positive forces in the affordable housing market, and their duty to serve commitments elicited through FHFA make an important contribution towards efforts to address the nation's affordable housing needs. The issue I want to discuss is how FHFA can use the enterprises to help address a housing preservation issue that arises from the ability of some owners to exit from their affordability requirements in the housing credit program after only 15 years of rent restrictions, even though the program calls for a minimum 30 years of affordability. This issue, qualified contract issue, was discussed by LISC and Enterprise in previous testimony. This qualified contract loophole has existed in the housing credit program since 1989, but it only began to be abused within the last few years. As those abuses came to light, major efforts were undertaken to encourage states to change their policies to require new tax credit applicants to waive their rights to seek a qualified contract. Many states took action to protect their affordable housing assets, but some did not, particularly in the case of the 4% credit program used with tax-exempt bonds. And a few of those who did enact waivers only required it for less than 15 years. As pointed out by the previous speakers, the National Council of State Housing Agencies estimates, or actually calculates, that more than 10,000 units are lost annually due to this loophole. Unfortunately, as we have increased our policy efforts to battle this, owner interest in converting their properties has only increased. Congress has been working to repeal the qualified contract provision, but in spite of the strong efforts of the former chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, Richie Neal, and the current chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, Ron Wyden, No legislation has been enacted because of determined opposition. Meanwhile, states continue to award valuable tax credit subsidies to housing credit developments that are supposed to be rent restricted for 30 years, but which permit developers to get out of the program after 15 years. Clearly a preservation issue. This is a waste of federal resources and results in cruel outcomes to the residents of these properties, who, when the property is converted, are forced to either move out of the property or pay hundreds of dollars more a month in rent. There exists an active secondary market for housing credit properties in which owners have the right to get out of their rent restrictions after 15 years. Buyers pay a huge premium because of their ability to vastly increase cash flow by raising rents. The Treasury Department took notice of this situation when it issued guidance with respect to the use of state and local fiscal relief funds enacted in the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. The Treasury Department recognized that it would compound an already unacceptable situation to provide more subsidy to these properties. Treasury Department guidance provided that no housing credit properties that have the right to convert to market rent housing after 15 years through the qualified contact provision would be eligible for state and local fiscal relief housing funds. I'm asking you to extend that policy to the enterprises with respect to their financing of housing credit properties. Do what the Treasury Department did. Stop further federal resources, in the case of the GSEs, through the implicit federal backing and federal subsidy. Prohibit those from being used toward the abuse of the housing credit program. So prohibit GSEs specifically from investing or acquiring multifamily loans on housing credit properties unless the owner has agreed to waive its qualified contract rights. And also prohibit GSEs from acquiring multifamily loans on properties originally financed with housing credits, where an owner has either taken the property through the qualified contract process or has the ability to do so. Thank you for the opportunity to share my views with you. Although this is offered as part of your review and preparation for the 25 to 27 DTS plans, I hope it is a policy that you can put in place before 2025. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosen. Okay, so our next speaker is Mr. Brian Stromberg from Grounded Solutions Network.
Yeah, thank you, Toy. My name is Brian Stromberg, and I am the National Policy Director for Grounded Solutions Network. We are a nonprofit membership organization of over 300 nonprofits and local governments that sponsor shared equity homeownership programs. And like many others on this call and the most recent calls, we are also a member of the Underserved Mortgage Market Coalition. We are very grateful to FHFA for holding these listening sessions and to both of the GSEs for continuing to include shared equity homeownership as an activity in their plans, and we hope that they will continue to do so. Before moving into any recommendations or requests, it is important to acknowledge that much progress has been made over the last few years. Both GSEs have provided material support to vital research efforts. They've supported the development and adoption of a model deed restriction, pursued program certification processes, and rolled out very important selling guide changes. We are grateful for and we celebrate these accomplishments, but of course, there is always more to be done. Our requests and recommendations today focus on simplifying, aligning, and leveraging efforts in 4 areas: the aforementioned model documents, the selling guide changes associated with them, program certification, and ongoing research efforts. Our recommendations are based on the belief that the fundamental barrier to growing the shared equity market, to increasing liquidity in the shared equity market, is the lack of standardization. This is not in the nature of shared equity programs, but rather across the GSEs in terms of their selling guide requirements, the treatment of model documents, and the program certifications that they've engaged in. Mandated alignment may be necessary to effectively achieve these goals, although a talk directive may suffice in some cases. We recognize that this would be a strong action on the part of FHFA, but standardization will be difficult to achieve without coordinated alignment between the 2 enterprises. If our recommendations are fully enacted, it would expand access by low and moderate income households to affordable and stable homeownership opportunities across the country, whether through a community land trust or another form of shared equity program. I will begin with requests related to the model documents and selling guide changes. First, we ask that the GSEs provide support for an update of the model ground lease, followed by an alignment across both GSE selling guides. They will both be providing the same product offering for shared equity programs using the model ground lease. This includes clear appraisal instructions as in the Fannie Mae selling guide and removing the need for writers so that loans using the model ground lease document can be sold to either GSE. Second, we ask for alignment between the GSE selling guides, whether it comes to a model deed restriction in order to minimize lender burden. Following this, we ask that the GSE support any needed changes to that model deed restriction to ensure it is accurate and compliant with both selling guides without the need for writers or amendments, so that, as with the model ground lease, loans using the model deed restriction can be sold to either GSE. Third, we ask the GSEs limit any exceptions to the published selling guide provisions for individual programs, excuse me, for individual programs in order to encourage the use of these standardized documents. The presence of exceptions undermines standardization in the field and limits lenders from broadly lending to borrowers across shared equity programs. Some may consider so much alignment as being detrimental to competition between the GSEs. However, we feel that the shared equity market is not large enough as it is to sustain the current level of diversity in products. We have two shared equity models, ground leases and deed restrictions, that are treated differently across two different GSEs that have unaligned underwriting requirements. And we feel like this asks too much of lenders. It prevents shared equity lending from being integrated into the normal course of business. Additionally, the aligned product offering should accurately reflect the risk associated with shared equity loans. We ask FHFA to help identify where product offerings can be simplified and to evaluate whether the shared equity programs do in fact justify additional underwriting requirements. We do not believe that they do. We are concerned the GSEs are inaccurately assessing the risk of shared equity loans, and this is disproportionately affecting lower income households of color. More details on these recommendations are available in our public comment. Regarding program certification, once alignment is achieved between the selling guides, we recommend that the GSEs develop and adopt a common program certification process. Our objective here is to have lenders be able to automatically underwrite a loan after checking program certification. As mentioned previously, both GSEs have participated in some form of program certification, although Fannie Mae's engagement has been more robust and has laid the foundation for significant impact in the future. As they reported in their 2022 annual duty to serve report, Fannie Mae worked with GSN to integrate the program certification into their systems by making the list available to all lenders and by providing certain incentives. Also mentioned earlier, we greatly appreciate the enterprise's support in fielding national surveys. In the next duty to serve period, we ask that both enterprises continue to partner with us on tracking the scale and growth of the shared equity field. Without this work, it is difficult to hold the GSEs to account for setting reasonable and meaningful loan purchase targets. In addition to the recommendations outlined above, we echo the other UMMC members in advocating for the introduction of target equity investments. We believe that underserved markets would greatly benefit from even relatively small targeted investments. And another critically important change is for FHFA to publish duty to serve and equitable housing finance evaluation data at an objective level. I'd like to thank FHFA for continuing to run a participatory process to accomplish the objectives and duty to serve, and we look forward to providing additional detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stromberg. Our next speaker is Mr. Greg Zagorski from the National Council of State Housing Agencies.
Thank you, Toy. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and thank you to FHFA for continuing to hold these listening sessions as the enterprises entered their third planning cycle through duty to serve. Hi, as again, Greg Zagorski, the National Council of State Housing Agencies. We represent state housing finance agencies, and as state chartered public mission entities, HFAs are natural partners with the GSEs in fulfilling their duty to serve obligations. And so we know that Fannie and Freddie are both currently partnering with HFAs through duty to serve, not only with housing credit investments, but also working on initiatives to support manufactured housing lending and resident-owned manufactured housing communities, as well as projects regarding lending to low and moderate income families and in rural areas. And, we encourage Fannie and Freddie, and we hope FHFA will encourage them too, to continue looking for opportunities for partnerships with HFAs as you plan your third duty to serve cycle. So the remainder of my remarks are going to focus on the GSE's housing credit investment, which we think have been one of their most impactful duty to serve initiatives. We really do appreciate FHFA back when duty to serve was first implemented, allowing the GSEs to resume housing credit investments and giving them credit for such investments in rural areas. Excuse me for a second. Such permission really couldn't have come at a more opportune time, because after the passage of the 2017 Tax Cut Act, there was downward pressure on the price of housing credits, and of course, housing credits for projects in rural areas, they face other challenges in getting support, including kind of a lack of investors in those areas and the need to often to set the rents at a lower price area. So it was really critical in having the GSEs enter. It was really helpful. And we encourage both of them to continue making such investments a part of their duty to serve plans moving forward. So there are a couple issues that have come up that we really think will strengthen and really think help make these housing credit investments more impactful. And one, of course, is the qualified contract issue that LISC Enterprise and Rob Rosen have done a great job of outlining already, but just to kind of go through it. The qualified contract provision was put into the tax code in 1989 because the housing credit was a developing program, and they wanted to try to provide investors and lenders and like some certainty in case it worked out. And it never really was used very often until 2012 when the housing market started to boom and some property owners saw it as a chance to really start kind of cashing in and getting to the market rents. And has been pointed out by some others, we've done some analysis, and right now we believe about 10,000 affordable apartments are put off the market each year by the QC loophole. Now, as been said, the vast majority of HFAs have gone in and they have prevented new credit allocations from being given to those who won't waive their QC rights. We appreciate that, but that only applies prospectively. Retroactively, there's not much you can do. So there's still those properties out there that have that QC loophole. And so we have been trying to do everything we can to make sure that that QC provision is not taken advantage of. And so we do ask FHFA to just try to take broader perspectives, prohibiting the GSEs from making housing credit investments in properties where the QC loophole has not been waived, preventing the federal home loan banks from providing funding for such projects. And when it comes to duty to serve rule, we do ask that, we don't feel as a Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac should be able to get any duty to serve credit for housing credit investments for properties where the QC loophole is still in place. That would really just cut against the whole purpose of the rule, which is to support the preservation of affordable housing options. If you have this loophole where after 15 years, the affordability requirements can be waived. So we feel very strongly about that. And there's one other issue that is a little technical, but we feel it's going to impact the GSE's ability to make housing credit investments. Thank you very much, which is right now, many housing credit investments, especially in rural areas, are made what's called for multi-investor funds, where multiple investors will go together on a certain project to kind of spread the risk. Fannie Mae makes a lot of their housing credit investments in rural areas through these funds. We understand Freddie Mac is considering that as well. Well, recently an issue emerged where some other investors who participate in the fund raised concerns that Fannie Mae might be considered what is called a tax-exempt controlled entity. And the problem with this is that if there is a tax-exempt controlled entity in these funds, all the investors lose access to certain tax benefits. So they might not want to participate in a fund if Fannie or Freddie are in there. And so Fannie Mae has had to kind of not been allowed to make some of these investments because of that. And given this, they've actually cut back specifically a lot of their housing credit investment goals for the 2023 plan. We have asked Treasury to clarify that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are not considered tax-exempt controlled entities. We don't believe that was the purpose. We would urge FHFA to also ask Treasury to get that to issue such a clarification so that Fannie and Freddie can continue taking advantage of multi-investor pools to make these critical investments. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Zagorski. Our next speaker is Ms. Althea Arnold from the Stewards of Affordable Housing for the Future.
Thank you, Toy, and hello, everyone. My name is Althea Arnold, and I'm the Senior Vice President for Policy and Stewards of Affordable Housing for the Future. On behalf of SAFE, thank you, FHFA and the enterprises for this opportunity to participate in a session dedicated to affordable housing preservation as the enterprises prepare for their 2025 to 2027 duty to serve plans. SAFE is a collaborative of 12 of the largest exemplary multi-state nonprofits. Our members collectively own, operate, and manage about 150,000 affordable rental homes and close to 2,000 properties across the country. Loans purchased by the enterprises are just one important source of capital that our members use to create and preserve affordable homes. We appreciate this capital, but we also appreciate the role that the enterprises can play in sparking innovation and best practices among investors and the investment market. Threats to the financial and physical health of an aging housing stock, such as the accelerating loss of low-income rentals, a cliff of housing credit properties reaching the end of their 30-year affordability restrictions, the increased use of the qualified contract loophole, and challenges to the right of first refusal, all reinforce the urgent role the enterprises can and should be playing in addressing affordable housing preservation. In SAFE's comments on the 2022 to 2024 duty to serve plans, we highlighted the challenges to nonprofits' right of first refusal, or ROFR, established in Section 42I7 of the tax code, as one of the most significant threats to the housing credit program and long-term affordability. We were pleased to see Freddie Mac's decision to help preserve nonprofit control by including language in its standard partnership agreements intended to prohibit the limited partner interest from being sold to a party with a history of attempting to frustrate ROFRs, and making this language available to all syndicators. We understand that these actions will not put a full stop to ROFR disputes, given the enterprise is only one of the investors working with nonprofit developers, and the language is intended only for new transactions. But this is a welcome and needed signal to the investment market. The enterprises should consider adopting even stronger language to protect ROFRs and preservation, comparable to what several allocating agencies have already done. As one example, given that access to large reserves intended to be held for the benefit of properties have in some instances been a driver behind or the target of disputes around investor exits or exercising ROFR, we urge the enterprises to make standard language around reserves that clearly indicate that they are intended to remain with the property. As several colleagues on this call have already shared, we also urge FHFA to work with the enterprises and prohibit them from investing in or acquiring loans on properties in which the owner has not agreed to waive their qualified contract, and bar the GSEs from acquiring loans on properties where an owner has already taken the property through the QC process. As investors in the space, we urge Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to conduct research and outreach to further identify housing credit properties that are at higher risk of exiting the program and increase their loan purchase targets for 2025 to 2027. We are pleased to be here with fellow industry partners, including those on the Underserved Mortgage Markets Coalition. I just wanted to echo Mark Kutlowitz's previous comments, and this is in line with the UMMC, but we urge FHFA to take steps to encourage targeted equity investments in underserved markets. Thank you. SAFE strongly supports enterprises' plans to report on sustainability and resiliency, as they can be valuable tools for practitioners. We also, thinking beyond incentives, we also encourage the GSEs to look at practices providing a more comprehensive approach. This could include case studies of properties, talking to practitioners, and including issues on underwriting. Finally, we urge FHFA to publish its duty to serve and equitable housing finance evaluations. Objective level data creates the feedback loop needed for the strategic planning process to improve the enterprise's business process. We encourage FHFA to publish this evaluative data so this can begin. SAFE appreciates the opportunity to share these comments ahead of the 2025 to 2027 duty to serve plans. We look forward to future collaboration and engagement.
Thank you, Ms. Arnold. Our next speaker is Ms. Leslie Gooch from the Manufactured Housing Institute.
Thank you to the team from FHFA, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and everyone joining today. I'm Leslie Gooch of the Manufactured Housing Institute. MHI is the only national trade association that represents every segment of the factory-built housing industry. My comments today are focused on the preservation of land lease communities. Discussion about preservation of affordable housing cannot be complete without considering the preservation of land lease communities. There are more than 43,000 land lease communities in the United States with an estimated 4.3 million home sites. 31% of all the manufactured homes that are produced every year are placed in land lease communities. So FHFA policy should encourage capital investment into these land lease communities and financing support for residents who are seeking to purchase a home within the community. And this would help preserve the most affordable homeownership, the most affordable form of homeownership in America. This hybrid homeownership model in land lease manufactured housing communities provides quality, affordable housing experience, resulting in satisfied residents who choose to remain in these communities long-term. MHI research demonstrates that residents of professionally managed land lease manufactured housing communities value their community's extensive offering of amenities and the ongoing investments that are made by the community owner-operators. Without FHFA support to preserve these aging communities, many could be at risk of closure, where the land will be used for other, likely non-affordable housing purposes. Objective data shows that land rent increases in land lease manufactured home communities across the country today are well below cost increases in other forms of affordable housing. On average, the rent paid by manufactured housing residents in land lease communities is between 9 and 25% more affordable than market rents for comparable rentals, depending on the market. In MHI's 2020 study of residents of manufactured housing communities, the majority of residents said that their rent is competitive or below average compared to other nearby housing options. Other than some outliers, for the most part, it has been a very good thing for residents when a new owner purchases an aging community. New owners have the resources to preserve the communities and address long neglected infrastructure problems like water, sewer, roadways, and other important amenities. It benefits the residents when the owners are doing these needed infrastructure upgrades, as this is critical for community preservation. For some time now, enterprise manufactured home community loans have been subject to substantive tenant protections. In fact, the protections in place were originally put forth by MHI as a way to encourage Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to support a secondary market for personal property loans. The vast majority of community owners already followed these protections, regardless of whether they received enterprise loans. It was the industry norm. Community owners are also governed by local statutes, case law, regulations, and private contractual arrangements, all providing for specific protections and responsibilities. I would like to make two essential points with regard to these protections. First, the GSE's pad lease protections cover all of the essential consumer protections that are needed to ensure that a manufactured homeowner can protect their home investment, including in situations when they're financially unable to make their rent. Second, any expansion or heightening of such tenant pad lease protection would run a serious risk that manufactured home community owners would no longer seek enterprise financing for communities, This would undermine preservation of older communities that need financing to repair aging infrastructure in order to preserve value of homes in such communities. In conclusion, rather than adopting policies that would have the impact of reducing support for land lease manufactured housing communities, we believe the FHFA should lean in to support the preservations of these communities. Further, as I commented yesterday, people seeking homeownership through land lease communities should be supported by ensuring that GSE financing is available to those purchasing homes. With that, I close my presentation and I thank the FHFA for this week's opportunity to present MHI's views and perspectives about how manufactured housing should be an integral part of each area of the GSE's duty to serve plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gooch. All right, so our next speaker is Mr. Dan Emanuel from the National Low Income Housing Coalition.
Thanks, Joy. I'd like to start by thanking FHFA for inviting the National Low Income Housing Coalition to speak at this listening session. My name is Dan Emanuel, and I'm a senior research analyst at NLIHC. Among other things, my work at the coalition focuses on preservation research. For those of you who may not be familiar with us, NLIHC is a national policy, research, and advocacy organization. Our goals are to preserve existing federally assisted homes and housing resources, expand the supply of housing for low-income renters, and establish housing stability as the primary purpose of federal low-income housing policy. One of NLIHC's long-term projects is the National Housing Preservation Database, which we co-manage with the Public and Affordable Housing Research Corporation. The NHPD is the only national, fully deduplicated, address-level inventory of federally assisted rental housing. It's used by researchers, planners, and advocates to understand affordable housing preservation risks and other issues facing the federally assisted housing stock. Importantly, the NHPD includes properties subsidized by the low-income housing tax credit. In recent years, our research efforts with the NHPD have focused heavily on quantifying and characterizing emerging LIHTC preservation challenges, both in terms of direct threats to the stock and data issues that undermine effective planning and research. My comments today will focus specifically on the qualified contract issue in the LIHTC program. First, however, I'd like to provide some context on why LIHTC preservation is such an important issue for FHFA to consider. LIHTC properties are home to renters with incomes far below what the program's maximum income eligibility thresholds might suggest. The median household income amongst LIHTC tenants was just $18,200 as of December 31st, 2019, and approximately 53% of households in LIHTC properties earned no more than 30% of the area median income at the time, which is the lowest income group identified by HUD. HUD's publicly available LIHTC tenant data does not permit the analysis of cost burdens or rental assistance utilization among LIHTC tenants by income. Even so, in an earlier national sample of LIHTC households, 28% of LIHTC households with incomes at or below 30% of AMI, and 11% of those with incomes between 31 and 50% of AMI were severely cost burdened, devoting more than half of their income to housing costs. Approximately 70% of LIHTC households with incomes at or below 30% AMI received some form of additional rental assistance. Among LIHTC households with incomes at or below 30% of AMI who did not receive rental assistance, 58% reported severe housing cost burdens. LIHTC preservation risks, including the QC loophole, must be understood in the context of these tenant data. Although research from Freddie Mac finds that former LIHTC properties generally remain affordable to households at or below 60% of AMI, this income threshold far exceeds the incomes of the majority of the existing LIHTC tenants. Even a modest rent increase following a LIHTC property's exit from the program has the potential to destabilize renters with such low incomes, particularly those without access to rental assistance. The qualified contract loophole, therefore, is an acute concern for LIHTC preservation. While some states have taken measures to close this loophole, others have not, and some LIHTC owners are making strategic use of this opportunity. NYC and Park recently conducted an historical comparison of HUD's LIHTC property database to estimate the loss of units to qualified contracts. We found that over 100,000 units may have been lost to the QC loophole since 1990. Estimates from other organizations suggest we may be losing 10,000 units a year to the loophole. Accordingly, I strongly urge FHFA to take the following actions being advocated by NYHC and other organizations. 1, prohibit the GSEs from investing in LIHTC properties unless the owner has agreed to waive their QC rights. 2, prohibit GSEs from acquiring multifamily loans on LIHTC properties unless the owner has agreed to waive their QC rights. 3, prohibit GSEs from acquiring multifamily loans on properties financed with LIHTC where an owner has successfully taken the property through the QC process. And 4, prohibit the federal home loan banks from providing AHP funds to LIHTC properties where the owner hasn't waived their QC rights. NYHC strongly supports any further actions that FHFA, and by extension the GSEs, can take to prevent the use of the qualified contract loophole and to ultimately protect low-income renters. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Emanuel. All right, so we are halfway through today's listening session where we would now take a short 10-minute break. It is now 2:05, well, 2:06. So I will see you all back here at 2:16. Okay. It is now 2:16 p.m., so we'll resume back in continuing on with the remainder of our speakers for today's session. And so now first up we now have is Miss Sadie McKeown from the Community Preservation Corporation. You're muted, Ms. McNeil. You want to unmute?
Yeah, I'm on. How's that?
There you are.
Okay, thank you, Toy. Apologies for that. I want to say thank you to FHFA for inviting the Community Preservation Corporation to provide comments today. My name is Sadie McKeown. I'm the president of CPC. We are one of the largest CDFIs nationally addressing financing for multifamily affordable housing, both naturally occurring as well as subsidized affordable housing. CPC has been around for almost 50 years. We've been working with the GSEs since the 90s. So we have a long history of working with Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, and we are very appreciative to the work that they're doing in affordable housing. But we're here today to talk about more that they can be doing, and we have some recommendations. Community Preservation Corporation is the majority owner of the CPC's mortgage company. We have two equity partners in our mortgage company, also CDFIs, the National Equity Fund, as well as Sinair. We have a national footprint through those two partners. We also work with a variety of other CDFIs as correspondents. We created our mortgage company to provide access to GSE products for CDFIs. We know that Freddie and Fannie have limited licenses on the multifamily side, and that CDFIs are not necessarily going to get their own licenses, but we recognize how important the products are in the affordable housing market, and we wanted to try and provide access to CDFIs for the GSE products. We ask that duty to serve underscore how important work is with CDFIs. We do work that other mortgage banks that hold multifamily licenses don't do. We work with small buildings, we work with small developers, we work in rural communities, and we do deals regardless of size or profitability. We do them for the purpose of having an impact in communities, and having access to the GSEs is really important. But we ask that the GSEs prioritize the work that we do, provide appropriate goals to CDFIs consistent with the scale at which we lend, but also in recognition of the impact that we can make. We're an important part of the multifamily ecosystem, and we want to be seen as that to the GSEs. To underscore that, we would like to request that duty to serve include liquidity for CDFIs that reaches far further than the GSEs are willing to reach today. As a practical matter, we can aggregate very small loans, which otherwise would not be financeable with GSE small loan products because they're too small on a unit basis. The borrowers are too inexperienced and don't clear the Freddie and Fannie liquidity and net worth hurdles. But these are owners, mom and pop owners that own maybe 1, 2, 3 properties and are important players in the neighborhoods that we serve. And they provide much needed affordable housing in small, naturally occurring properties. And so we ask that the duty to serve include thresholds that are much smaller now for portfolio purchases by the GSEs. So it's very hard for us to aggregate loan pools in excess of, say, $25 million. And Freddie and Fannie typically don't want to buy loan pools unless they're much larger, $100 to $200 million. So we ask that liquidity could be provided at a much smaller scale. That would help us continue to drive small lending in ways that we can't one-off with GSE products currently. The second thing that we really want to underscore that should be a component of duty to serve is addressing the climate crisis alongside of the affordability crisis in our country. Decarbonization of housing is very important. And right now, it's not a component part of duty to serve. There are lots of resources that can be leveraged through the IRA, and we encourage Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae to reach further than they currently are with their green products to include decarbonization. We feel very strongly that unless the first mortgage markets begin to address decarbonization as a routine part of their lending process, similar to the way they address radon, asbestos, lead paint, and other pollutants, that we won't be able to fully reach the federal goals for a clean energy transition that have been set forth by the Biden administration. So we are very focused on decarbonization and encourage the GSCs to address it in the work that they do. Lastly, I just want to say that given the increasing costs of insurance, property insurance for multifamily properties, which are impairing affordability and preventing access to capital, we ask that FHFA, alongside of Freddie and Fannie, do what they can to convene with the insurance industry to figure out ways to address the ever escalating costs of insurance for properties so that communities are not redlined from an insurance perspective, which then creates them as redlined from a financing perspective. So we encourage you to address that as well. Thank you again very much, Toy and FHFA. We appreciate the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Ms. Keown. And our next speaker is Mr. Benson Roberts from the National Association of Affordable Housing Lenders.
Thank you, Toy. As far as I know, we are not related, but appreciate your involving us in this very important listening session. I represent the National Association of Affordable Housing Lenders. NAHL is the alliance of major banks, CDFIs, including the Community Preservation Corporation, LISC, and Enterprise, as well as others, and as well as some housing finance agencies. Our mission is to expand economic opportunity by financing affordable housing and inclusive neighborhood revitalization. I want to expand on the points made earlier by several others, that Fannie and Freddie should provide debt and equity financing for low-income housing tax credit properties only if the owners agree not to prematurely terminate affordability through the qualified contract process and have not already done so. This policy is fundamental to preserving the affordability of rental housing. So FHFA should build it into its duty to serve rules for housing preservation. Tax credit properties that could or previously did prematurely end affordability must not receive recognition as contributing to the preservation of affordable housing. FHFA should also apply this principle beyond the duty to serve context because it addresses a basic tenant protection. Since many states already require tax credit applicants to waive the qualified contract provision, the incremental effect of an FHFA policy would apply to properties in the remaining states, as well as to properties that were financed before state requirements kicked in. And this policy would not prevent the GSEs from financing most tax credit properties. Rather, it would screen out bad actors that are not truly committed to long-term affordability. How did we get here? Under the qualified contract provision, a tax credit property owner can terminate affordability after 15 years instead of at least 30 years. But it first must give the state 1 year to find a buyer that can offer a qualified contract to buy the property at the formula price. And that formula price allows investors to recover their initial equity investment plus inflation. Congress enacted this provision in 1989 when it effectively extended the tax credit minimum affordability period from 15 years to 30 years. And that was only 3 years after LIHTC was first enacted. So the program was still very young and the investor market was still forming. The qualified contract provision was seldom used for many years. Our concern today has arisen because of two dramatic changes since 1989. First, changes in the way tax credit practices have changed, and second, because of changes in local housing markets. In 1989, a typical cost of construction was maybe $50,000 per apartment, and tax credit equity funded about 30% of that cost. So the qualified contract price, owners that states would have to find a successor owner to offer, that qualified contract price would pay investors about $15,000 plus inflation. And that amount was very compatible with preserving affordability over the long term. Moreover, many low rent apartments had limited market value at the time, so there is really very little opportunity for owners or successor owners to raise rents if affordability restrictions were lifted.
1 minute remaining.
Are in a very different place today. The tax benefits are sufficient to attract tax credit project financing without recovery of capital. So the qualified contract provision is unnecessary to attract that capital. And construction costs are commonly now anywhere from, say, $300,000 to $500,000 per apartment, with tax credits contributing perhaps 60% or more of that cost. And that means that owners invoking the qualified contract provision would receive $180,000 to $300,000 per apartment plus inflation. And that amount is 12 to 20 times the amount expected back in 1989. And it is way too high to preserve affordability. Moreover, rising market rents make it much more possible for owners to reap windfall profits by ending affordability. And that explains why we are prematurely losing affordability on about 10,000 LIHTC apartments annually through the qualified contract loophole. And now, when the US is facing a severe shortage of affordable housing, we must do everything possible to preserve affordability. So what began as an exit ramp for investors has become a loophole. And FHFA and the GSE should not facilitate the premature termination of affordability, and certainly not under the banner of affordable housing preservation. Thank you.
Or you're on mute.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I just want to thank Mr. Roberts for his remarks. And now introducing our next speaker, Mr. Mark Kresowit from American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy.
Thank you, Toy. And thank you to FHFA and the enterprises for your hard efforts to support affordable housing through the Duty to Serve program, and for the opportunity to share our perspectives with you all today. I am Mark Kresowit, the Senior Policy Director for the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. We are a national nonprofit research assistance and advocacy organization developing and supporting transformative policies to reduce energy waste and help avoid the worst impacts of climate disruption. With our independent analysis, we aim to build a vibrant and equitable economy, one that uses energy more productively, reduces costs, protects the environment, and promotes the health, safety, and well-being of everyone. Like some of the others speaking here today, we are also a member of the Underserved Mortgage Markets Coalition, a collection of 29 organizations that work to expand mortgage financing to groups traditionally underserved in the market. Some of the biggest risks to affordable housing preservation and the financial stability of the enterprises are those caused by climate disruption and high energy burdens due to burning increasingly expensive fossil fuels and inefficient use of energy. I very much appreciated Ted's reference to our data on household energy burdens in his intro, the gentleman from Freddie Mac's highlighting of their energy efficiency efforts, and Fannie Mae's recent multifamily electrification and decarbonization roadmap. I'd also like to acknowledge FHFA's high marks on Ceres' annual climate risk scorecard, published this last week. You are leading the way on these issues amongst federal regulators of the financial system. But unfortunately, the risks to affordable housing in the enterprises are still accelerating. The last few weeks have delivered the hottest days in recorded history. Unhealthy air quality across the nation due to uncontrolled wildfires, destructive floods in the Northeast, and a cascade of insurance company departures from markets experiencing extreme events exacerbated by climate change, particularly Florida and California. Continued worsening conditions will damage and destroy more homes, especially in already underserved communities, wiping out homeowners' finances and increasing mortgage delinquency rates. As customers flee the increasingly destructive fossil fuel system, energy costs for those who remain behind will rise. According to Fannie Mae, utilities are already the third highest monthly cost for first-time low-income homeowners, behind only property taxes and home repairs. And higher energy burdens will similarly threaten financial stability. The solutions to these threats and ultimately the preservation and expansion of affordable housing in this country are interlinked. First, as other federal agencies like HUD and USDA have proposed to do for their portfolios, ensure that all new homes backed by the enterprises meet minimum building codes for energy efficiency, electrification, and climate resilience. Second, require disclosure of both climate risk and energy performance for existing homes backed by the enterprises. And third, expand access to mortgage financing for energy efficiency and electrification, particularly for underserved communities, including through enabling targeted equity investments. The unprecedented level of financial incentives that will roll out through the Inflation Reduction Act's tax credits, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, and home energy rebates create an opportunity for the enterprises to help bolster community development financial institutions as they seek to bridge financing gaps and support rapid deployment of those resources. Affordable housing residents cannot afford to wait any longer for these actions. They are experiencing the harmful impacts of extreme events and energy burdens exacerbated by climate disruption and unaffordable fossil fuels today. FHFA and the enterprises need to dramatically accelerate actions to disclose and address climate risk and energy performance to keep homeownership within reach for everyone, most especially those in historically marginalized and underserved communities. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Kresowick. Our next speakers, we have two speakers for our next segment, Mr. Justin Coles and Terry Scott from Rebuilding Together, Tampa Bay. All right. Do we have Mr. Coles and Mr. Scott ready to give their remarks? Okay, I'll just move on to the next speaker. All right, so the next speaker is Mr. Stephen Sharp of the National Consumer Law Center.
Thank you to FHFA, and we really appreciate the opportunity to share. My name is Steve Sharp. I'm a senior attorney at the National Consumer Law Center, focusing primarily on single-family mortgage servicing, though I am, in my previous work, did work on low-income housing tax credit issues, and jealous and encouraged and very motivated by the great conversation on low-income housing tax credit that occurred earlier from my UMMC colleagues. So. But today we'll not be focusing on that. We'll be focusing instead on single family note sales, both the re-performing loan note sales and the non-performing loan sales that the enterprises do, and want to focus on some important changes that have happened and some still work to be done. So as outlined in NCLC's recent report on note sales, we are concerned that they have the impact of stripping affordability because when notes are sold, the foreclosure protections that have been so thoughtfully and impactfully developed by the enterprises are stripped from those borrowers who then face the purchaser who do generally not have publicly available and clear loss mitigation and foreclosure alternatives for those borrowers. So we are concerned that tends to lead toward just generally reducing affordable housing because it takes affordable loans away from borrowers who desperately need options to avoid foreclosure. And we're concerned also, and we shared this in our report, that data showing that note sales actually help borrowers are based on outdated benchmarks and some analysis that we think really no longer applies. So we put together a report, and we really want to applaud FHFA and the enterprises for very recently taking steps to ensure more data reporting for reperforming loans, to make sure they're not selling loans that are in forbearance, and to improve deferral option, kind of a medium-term option to help borrowers who have regained their ability to make payments do that. So those have been recent changes in FHFA's fact sheet for note sales. And we're also understanding that some of the data analysis and benchmarking is in progress. And so we really do want to take this opportunity to applaud both the enterprises and FHFA for those changes. However, there is more work left to be done. And we see kind of 4 or 5 options, or 4 or 5 issues that remain. First, it is really crucial that there is a requirement that servicers exhaust and fully consider loss mitigation prior to sales. We want to make sure, especially for the non-performing loans, that loans are not entering pools when they should be served by GSE foreclosure alternatives. We are concerned that there still are servicers who have not fully complied with options prior to sale, and that we really do need something very specific in the fact sheet and in that to ensure that all loans have been exhausted for loss mitigation. The other part of that is we think a notice to borrowers prior to sale is very important. It will give opportunity for a borrower who thought something was happening to raise their hand to say if foreclosure alternatives are in the middle of being considered or were never offered. That borrower has the opportunity to know prior to the sale that their loan is about to be sold and has an opportunity to raise their hand. So we do think something explicit on pre-foreclosure or pre-sale for foreclosure alternative exhaustion is still crucial, and that notice to borrowers are still crucial. The other thing that is important is that once loans are sold, we believe the current test for what is sufficient foreclosure alternatives for those borrowers, which is the current benefit of the borrower test, is an insufficient guidepost for making sure that they do have options available after sale. We think that benefit of the borrower is essentially too vague to be meaningful, and that we would urge FHFA and the enterprises to generate some further guardrails, more specific guidance, or at least require purchasers to make their options publicly available in order to make sure that there are options that are clear and available for borrowers. But we do think improved data on reperforming loans is important. Make sure that data is not just reported, but also, provided by purchasers, but also reported. And finally, we do think sales should give a preference to housing-focused nonprofits and other eligible purchasers that commit to maximizing homeownership preservation outcomes. So important single-family issues for note sale. Again, thanks for the opportunity to share here and for recent guidance and recent improvements, and we look forward to continuing to work with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sharp. Our next speaker we have is Mr. Willie Fleming from Chicago Anti-Eviction Campaign, NFP. Do we have?
Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Hello
you.
there.
Did you want to turn on your video camera?
Yes, give me 1 second. There we are.
Thank you.
Hi there. Thank you for having me. My name is Willie J.R. Fleming, Executive Director of the Chicago Anti-Eviction Campaign and a member of the National Low-Income Housing Coalition Tenant Cohort. I wanted to start off by saying I want to thank FHFA for taking this opportunity and conducting another listening sessions where we hope to address the issues of affordable housing. I'd like to start off by saying that the previous administrations had to tackle the issues of foreclosures and evictions since 2014, 2013. They were able to come up with great programs. One of them program particularly being the Neighborhood Stabilization Program, which later became the Neighborhood Stabilization Initiative. And this was done with the collective work of nonprofits, community developers, and contractors that we sought to address the issues of abandoned properties, blighted neighborhoods in our communities. The Chicago Anti-Eviction Campaign is a recognized community buyer, both with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, of foreclosed properties, who we believe serve a strong, who we believe gives a strong opportunity for neighborhoods to take control of this affordable housing crisis. We as the FHFA encourage Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to strengthen their program, both the Community First program ran by Fannie Mae and the NSI program, which is conducted by the National Community Stabilization Trust, and has both Fannie, Freddie, and bank-owned homes in them that were foreclosed. We believe that Fannie and Freddie should dramatically and drastically discount these foreclosed properties. Again, they should dramatically and drastically discount foreclosed property that they are selling to community buyers. The reason is, if Fannie and Freddie or the FHFA expect affordable housing to happen, it must take a step back in the area of profitability. The sacrifice that we're asking of landlords, local governments, and other agencies must be shared by the federal government. We believe that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are both in a unique position by having the opportunity to disposition these properties to community organizations and groups across the country who can then provide affordable housing. Fannie and Freddie have been utilizing outdated valuations and market tools like Zillow to guesstimate the value of the property, not taking into account crime and community, food deserts, closed schools, and rising property tax costs. If Fannie and Freddie hope to achieve affordable housing or to become a pioneer in this area, again, like they did with the NSI and Community First program, to help cities across the country who are seeing a dramatic increase in rental prices and home ownership prices, we believe that Fannie and Freddie, again, must expand, enhance, and take bold steps drastically and dramatically when pricing homes to be sold to community providers, community buyers, community developers, and nonprofit who then will provide affordable home ownership and affordable rental mechanism. We asked in the past that Fannie and Freddie and FHFA both encourage local governments to figure out a way to reduce property taxes, infrastructure bills like water bills, streets and sanitation that impact homeowners. We ask that Fannie Mae and Freddie and FHFA encourage local government to sacrifice profit in the areas of property taxes and services so that affordable housing is achievable. And on a federal level, again, we state we expect Fannie, Freddie, FHFA to expand and enhance and take bold steps, all of its programs around disposition and donation of properties to community nonprofits and community buyers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fleming. All right, and so our next speaker we have is Miss Victoria Lunston Barron, but I don't believe she is on the call. And we do have her down as our last speaker today. So if we don't have her, and we also did not have others on the call. I just want to say their names again. Miss Megan Haberly from the National Community Reinvestment Coalition. We have not heard from her. And we did not hear from Mr. Justin Coles and Mr. Terry Scott from Rebuilding Together Tampa Bay. Those folks are not on the call with us right now. So that concludes us hearing from all of our guest speakers today. Thank you. Thank you all of our guest speakers. And now to give closing remarks, I'd like to hand it back over to Marcia Behringer.
Hello again, everyone. This is Marcia Behringer. I just wanted to take a moment to thank all of you so much for your participation in today's session. I want to take an opportunity to thank all of our presenters for sharing their comments and to the audience for attending. We really appreciate the diversity of views that we heard expressed today on the affordable housing preservation market. Certainly, we heard a lot about the qualified contract and right of first refusal issues. We also were privileged to hear comments on single family distressed properties and foreclosed properties, on energy efficiency, and on shared equities. So thanks to all of you for sharing your views. We will take all of the remarks that we heard today, as well as any comments posted on FHFA.gov into consideration. I would ask all of you to think about submitting written comments on FHFA.gov, whether you were a speaker today or not. Also, you are very welcome to check back in the coming days where you'll find videos and the transcripts from all 3 of the listening sessions on Duty to Serve that we held this week. We look forward to continued collaboration with all of you, and I will turn things back over to Toy.
Thank you, Marcia. And now that concludes today's session. Thank you all again to all of our guest speakers and to all of you who joined us today and listening in on the remarks from our guest speakers. All comments will be posted on our website soon, just as Marcia has said. And remember, you can also submit written comments about the Enterprise's affordable housing preservation market activities on our Duty to Serve website at www.fhfa.gov/. And we will be accepting written comments through July 31st. All right, so thank you. And that concludes the session. Thank you.